It is the weirdest thing to me. Democrats say that it is racist to believe, well, they say it's racist to do anything. I had a Diet Mountain Dew yesterday and one today. I'm sure they're going to call that racist too, but it's good. I love you guys. But
I love you guys. Left Reckoning 179. JD Vance there. Hello, David.
How's it going, brother?
It's going pretty good. You know, what I love about that clip is the, there's some chuckles at the everything's racist. You can't do anything without being called racist now. But even more chuckles at the idea of Mountain Dew being good. That's an idea that we can all get behind. That is secretly, people always say, and I do agree, there's a through line of sort of maybe like white supremacist grievance, for instance, through the Trump campaigns, but also there's a through line of consumer sort of empowerment. We're talking about washers and dryers. We're talking about toilets. Do they flush? And we're talking about Mountain Dew. Does it taste good? Diet Coke. Does it actually make you skinny? Probably not, but I'll still keep drinking that garbage. That's really, if Trump does win, it's because he speaks to that as much as the bad angels of our nature.
I mean, it's a return to the familiar. If you've ever been to a lot of people's houses now, you open up their fridge, they got all kinds of weird shit now, all these kind of seltzers. I like back in the day, like when beer got you drunk, right? None of this like non-alcoholic shit. And seltzer was a non-alcoholic drink, not a kind of thing that's going to get you really, really fucking wasted unintentionally. I mean, like there's a callback to a lot of the Trump stuff. It's like, look, the world's a little different. Remember those brands that we love? We're going to bring those back. And also the left hates those.
Exactly. Yeah. What was that quote about Obama? Like before we had Obama, we had Bob Hope.
Yeah, Bob. It's like before. Yeah.
I'm trying to think.
Under Obama, we had Bob Hope, we had Johnny Cash, and we had Steve Jobs. Yeah. But under Obama, we had Steve Jobs, Bob Hope, and Johnny Cash, and now we got no jobs, no hope, and no cash. I think it would be great if we started seeing JD Vance bring some of that kind of classic American humor back as well.
He's a folksy guy, straight from the hills of Ohio. And
did you see the Bashir? You ain't from here.
Bashir's got a little bit. He's a little bit maybe a little bit stilted in his delivery, but I do appreciate that being a line of attack because I've really been upset at the "you're phony" line of attack on JD Vance because who's also phony is most Democrats and like people kind of
Donald Trump,
right? But they like learn to deal with it. The problem with JD Vance is that he is coming for you. Like he's actually a vampire. He blames his own people for their own predicament. He's the worst.
He wrote that shit down in a book,
exactly,
into a movie. It's really wild for him to get away with this. In a lot of ways, really a complete makeover.
And blaming. First it was, oh yeah, it's our own cultural problem. We got to look inward. Then it was immigrants. Like it's yeah.
He had to. It is the opposite of the Trump argument. The Trump argument is that America has lost itself, and it's down to like the salt of the earth, everyday people to come and reclaim power and make America great again. JD Vance's life story is, hey, I grew up amongst Hill people who had a really bad culture and were all addicted to drugs. And then I went to Yale and Silicon Valley and I learned how to be a military. Real man.
Yeah.
How to be a real man. I learned some real values out on the left coast. And now I'm back here to save the day. I mean, truly, if you wanted to have the worst messenger for the Trump movement, it might be JD Vance.
Yeah, and that's before you hear his delivery.
Yeah. That's the biggest news of the week, though, right? That JD Vance is the VP candidate for Trump. Nothing big happened last week, right?
Well, yeah. So, like, that's what's funny is now that it's happened that Joe Biden, people might not know, but he dropped out. He's too old to apparently do both, be president and campaign. He's now going to, what if he's just like really good on Israel Palestine now that he doesn't have to split his attention between campaigning and I think, as we talked about with Branko, he should probably resign both, but whatever.
Yeah.
And I kind of lost my train of thought there.
No, I mean, well, first of all, I mean, we're gonna have Branko Marcetic on in just a minute, who y'all all know, regular Left Reckoning guest, incredible writer at Jacobin, and also the author of, which, in my opinion, is like the definitive Joe Biden takedown, Yesterday's Man. But we're talking about Biden, and we're also talking about Kamala. But before we get there, I mean, Matt, you were right, and you were also clever enough to make sure that we got that on camera last week. During the post game, you asked me if I thought that Joe Biden was going to step down.
Oh,
And you said you absolutely thought he was going to step down. And I said I was feeling like he wasn't. I did say I thought that it was either going to happen on Sunday or wasn't going to happen at all. So sort of hedge my bets. But you were right, Matt. I mean,
it was
reaction to the news. What was your reaction to the news? I mean, it was a little, for people who spend a lot of time on like politics, Twitter, and things like that. It started to feel very close to done before the announcement. But what was your feeling on Sunday?
It was from the debate. The night home of the debate, I tweeted out an image of like Donald Duck like being really pissed on stage and getting that cartoon like hook from stage left that pulls him off, because it just felt like this is not feasible. Mm-hmm. And immediately you heard people saying, well, he's going to get back out on the campaign trail and prove to y'all that he can do this. And it's like, no, he's not. We all saw that. We all saw what we saw. It's not redeemable. And he's just incapable of, who knows what he's able to do in the Oval Office. It wouldn't be the first time that a person in that office is barely there for at least large chunks of the day. But he very clearly couldn't, he had a speech the day after the debate where he said some things and people were like, wow, look at him, he's back. And that was pure cope. That was, can we lie about this for 4 months? Because as much as you hear about like, oh, switching this late, the American election season is long as hell. And to lie to the American people or to try to grade on a curve, and every time Joe Biden depresses everybody with his presence and diminished, ability to be like, well, can we focus on Project 2025? It'd be nice. Look, the way I look at elections is like, okay, balance of power, coalitions, which movements and endorsements does this people have, and then just keep it moving, right? Mm-hmm. People want a hero. People want somebody to talk them through this planet's revolution around the sun. And so you can't have somebody who's out to lunch and who, doesn't know, who really, I mean, Joe Biden was clueless, as right now is clueless, because he's hemming and hawing about what he's done for NATO and how he's kept China down. And it's like, you've been a senator for so long, you don't know, like the last time for a guy who's been a senator for half century, he does a decent job of like looking like he could have some sort of blue collar connection with people, but he doesn't. And we're seeing that now.
It's funny about Joe Biden that so much was made about like his background, his blue collar, whatever. A lot of that's like kind of self mythology or whatever. But let's also add in the fact that like he was always like, I was always doubted. Right. That's the kind of motivating factor for Biden. Right. If you read a lot of his biographies or work about him, it's like Joe Biden feels aggrieved because he was never respected by the so-called elites. Right. Which he was going on again, which is very funny. It's like, dude, you are the president and the former vice president. But what is funny is that Joe Biden, at least for a little while, was able to sort of successfully create like personality around that. Because when Hillary Clinton sort of ran on the idea of it's my turn kind of thing, people rightfully were like furious at it. But with Biden, it's like, he is just the kind of scrappy guy from Scranton.
Right. But I mean, and good riddance to him, honestly. And if the party had, if I could direct a party, if this was my party to dictate to, it's from this point forward, it would be bury that guy, throw dirt on him. Like this policy of genocide, this would be a great time to turn the page on that, because in addition to a large part of Dem voters wanting this swap to have been made, upwards of 80% to like 17%, a lot, maybe not quite as many of them, but a large chunk of them want a ceasefire in Gaza and conditions on aid to Israel. So
Well, I will just say, he is still coming to my neck of the woods next week. He's going to give a speech at the LBJ Library on the commemoration of the Civil Rights Act. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see, one, how and if that happens, and two, what the next few months of Joe Biden kind of policy and public communication are going to be. I totally agree with people, by the way, who are saying like, "Hey, are we going to hear anything from him?" And it's very wild to have the president just tweet out, "I'm sick," and then disappear for a few days, and then release a press release, which is one of our wonderful listeners and followers remembered. Matt and I were always calling Joe Biden the press release president, and it is very apt that he did disappear on a press release.
you saw the follow up to that "I'm sick" tweet, right?
No, yeah.
He's I'm sick of these damn billionaires, because that was when it was only billionaires who thought he was too senile to run.
But I know we're going to jump over to Kamala, and we have plenty more to say about both of Biden and all of them. But before we do, I just wanted us to share a couple thoughts up front, since we were mainly interviewing Branko here. First of all, Matt, are you coconut pilled over here?
I qualify coconut pilled. I think it's humorous, but I think she's. I much rather, if you could just ask me who should run for the next 4 months, I'd pick Kamala Harris over Joe Biden. I'm sick of that motherfucker. I'm glad that he's going down like this. I do think it should be emphasized that it isn't just his age, but like, if this is a guy that that like people on the left, like if he was standing up to Israel and people were like rounded his support, this is a position he wouldn't find himself in, because he would and so like in that sense. But that's it. I'm agnostic about Kamala being better on, I think it, we get into this with a lot with Branko, but I'm agnostic really on her policy wise. I think that's kind of counting your chickens before counting your eggs before they hatch, sort of thing.
As you know, I'm not coconut pilled. I wanted Joe Biden to step down, and it's obvious that it was going to be kind of Kamala. Who knows? Maybe some chaos could have been interesting in the Democratic Party, open convention.
I looked at that, and there was some uncommitted delegates there too. There's about 4,000 delegates. My understanding is there's about, maybe I'm wrong about this, but around 50 or so uncommitted. So I don't know if there was been enough to really throw weight around, but I would have been open to that too.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Who knows what would happen, and particularly, I'm not particularly invested because it's not my political party,
right?
And that's sort of how I feel about Kamala Harris in general. I don't believe any of this kind of pivot shit that people have been buying, frankly. I think Kamala Harris is somebody who's been a very happy participant in Joe Biden's ongoing monstrosity in Gaza. I think that she is somebody who will change her opinions whichever which way the wind blows. I think one of the most telling moments of her political career in her relation to the left, because people were trying to talk about how Kamala ran on the left back in 2020. As Matt remembers, how much of a nightmare that whole situation was, because you saw all of those people trying to outflank Bernie rhetorically while maintaining fidelity with Wall Street. I think one of the most telling moments of Kamala Harris's primary campaign, at least for how the left should orient themselves around her, was when she was saying, "Oh, I support Medicare for all, just like Bernie," and why does everybody want the old white man instead of me? I'm just as progressive as Bernie, which is all fucking lie. And she said, "Oh yeah, I'll abolish private health insurance." And then when she got a bunch of calls an outcry from the elites and the wealthy, she said, "Oh, I misunderstood the question." And just watching somebody go and sort of fold so quickly on a basic kind of question like that, I think sort of told you everything that you need to know. Like I already distrusted her because of her political career and all that kind of stuff. But it was just a very clear moment. It's like, oh, this person is just going to try to pick up whatever she thinks is popular at the moment. So if anything, I think that it would behoove folks who do find themselves a little bit more engaged in Democratic Party politics to not start tripping over themselves in praise and adulation for somebody like Kamala, who I think you definitely need to be pressuring and need to be very clear in the same way that we were with Biden's like, we're not going to support somebody who supports, a genocide in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, the Bernie Sanders campaign, which is not to say Bernie himself, is sort of the dark matter that explains a few things, and that cuts both ways. The one that explains why Kamala ran progressively in 2020, because she was very obviously trying to dilute Bernie Sanders. It also explains why when people say, Joe Biden was, relative to other presidents that we have experienced on this earth recently, pro-labor. He was also that because he was inserted to to basically stop the Bernie Sanders candidacy, which would have been even. I won't say everything about Bernie Sanders, but I think it would have been more pro-labor than Joe Biden, at least ideologically speaking. That means there is a demand that frankly pre-existed Bernie's 2016 movement for these policies. And so, like, I think the most optimistic thing I would say about Kamala, it has nothing to do with her ideology, but it's that she is something of a just sort of opportunistic politician. And if those things are like, look, it's really up to how responsive is she to Sean Fain or people like that. And I think, just relatively speaking, it's more than Trump, which is all I'm going to be on record promising, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I think once we have more time to see the campaign and sort of think about it, it will be sort of interesting to map out how folks think a Kamala presidency will go, because there's a lot of contingency right now for sure. But we have plenty time to talk about that. I'm sure we have a whole summer to talk about all of that. I wanted to do a quick shout out before we jump over to Branko. Matt, if you wanted to, or you wanted to do it, we got, one of our political heroes. And I think her response to Kamala was the absolute correct one, even for a sitting member of the Democratic Party. I think this is exactly how everybody should be acting.
Yeah. So 2 tweets here. First, this one from Prem Talker, who just got hired by Zateo. Great pickup by Zateo. Rashid Tlaib, constituents want a permanent ceasefire, end funding of genocide in Gaza, humane immigration system, path to end fossil fuel subsidies, fight corporate greed, and more. Support transparent, open convention and DNC vote on arms embargo to stop Israeli government war crimes. And that's her statement on the Democratic presidential nomination. She said, I welcome the opportunity to engage with Vice President Harris. Good politics. Also, Melissa Nam-Burke. That basically just what we said there. I also want to put this out there. And this is back to Kamala a little bit, but as Biden goes and you say comes to your neck of the woods with the LBJ library. This is the history, the relevant history. September 30th, 1968, Humphrey had enough of Johnson and his war, and in a speech in Salt Lake City, he demanded a halt to the bombing. Humphrey called Johnson to warn him of the speech hours before. And then, listen, September 30th, 1968, that is like not 2 months ahead of the election, right? Humphrey fucking waited way too long. But anyway, Humphrey was anti-communist. We talked about this. But just to stay on track, I'll take it to Johnson reacted coldly. I take it you are not asking for my advice. You're going to give the speech anyway. Johnson then shunned Humphrey for the remainder of 1968. Indeed, the question remains over whether Johnson favored Richard Nixon over Humphrey the election. I did not know that. That's interesting. But also, and Rashid is still on it. Netanyahu is a war criminal committing genocide against the Palestinian people. It is utterly disgraceful that leaders from both parties have invited him to address Congress. He should be arrested and sent to the International Criminal Court. That's what should happen. I mean, Joe Biden wants to. We kind of got into this. Like, it's almost too late for Biden to do anything. You arrest Bibi Netanyahu. We can start talking about reducing your sentence yourself.
Two things. Two things Joe Biden could do: arrest Bibi and free Leonard Peltier. Those are two great things to do on your as you enter into a lame duck, bit. We also want to shout out the UAW too, and the rest of the unions making this call.
Yeah, so UAW has this tweet here. Since December, UAW has been calling for a ceasefire in Israel and Palestine and for an end to the war in Gaza. This week, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to come to Congress to ask our government to keep supporting this war. We reject this insult to all those calling for peace and justice. On Wednesday, July 24th, that's tomorrow.
Matt, your mic cut out, but I believe this the march is on Wednesday, July 24th.
Yeah, am I back yet? Along with the National Labor Network for Ceasefire is joining a mass mobilization in Washington, D.C. to oppose Netanyahu visit and call for end. And
which I want to make sure that we're shouting everyone out here too. That's the SEIU, that's the NEA. Oh, sorry, you have it there. The UAW, the APWU, the AFA, the UE, the IUPAT. So very, very exciting coalition there, which actually represents a significant portion of the American organized labor front. So
our boys at the Nevada Labor Report have had the American Postal Workers Union President Mark Diamondstein on, I believe, who himself is an anti-Zionist Jew. And, I find that I find his statements to have been some of the best among any leaders since this assault has begun. And it's just he's another example of all these people that are treated by Zionists as if they're insane and marginal, and actually no, it's basically the leaders that are already here have these positions. And I think his example, I mean, it's great to see. And flight attendants, that's Sarah Nelson.
Yeah, there's been a lot of really exciting things, and I think that's what matters the most is building up a strong coalition that can engage in politics in a real serious way. That's what we're seeing with these transformations that are happening in a lot of unions across the United States. Damn. I know everyone's probably disappointed that we're done talking about Biden and Kamala. No, don't you worry, friends. It's not over yet. We're about to be joined by our good friend Branko Marcetic to talk more in depth about Joe Biden. What we got here? Oh, sorry, we forgot about this.
We have the great Kamala Harris tweet, and I just want to drive this home a little bit, because if she does become president, we need this to be a laughingstock, so they have to run away from this sort of thing. Because this is the epitome of a certain type of Democrat policymaking. Yesterday announced that as president, I'll establish a student loan debt forgiveness program for Pell Grant recipients who start a business that operates for 3 years in disadvantaged communities. How about nobody should be indebted for getting a goddamn education? How about that?
I mean, it's such bad politics, and really, it's like what's so sickening about those folks and that kind of entire political ideology is like they're negotiating against themselves before they sit at the negotiating table, right? I mean, absolutely. First of all, it's like thinking about what that does for people and how specific that is. It's truly bizarre. As a kind of policy. So it's like, so we're like only going to do things that help out people who might be indebted, who own a business.
As long as they're business owners in certain areas.
If you're a business owner, I mean, there's certain areas is like, that's where they're trying to be progressive, right? But the funniest thing is like say, hey, we're going to help out small business owners, and we're going to help out business owners in America because frankly, understanding their coalition at this point.
That's who donates, and
exactly.
It's so fucking funny though. Like, what if you were a Pell Grant recipient who was operating a small business, but it wasn't or what if it wasn't a disadvantaged community, but you just didn't get Pell Grants, but you're massively in debt? Like, I don't know. Like, debt should not. This debt should not exist.
Well,
we have let this be over financialized. It's ludicrous, and it's leading to all sorts of massive societal, like, negative outcomes for people that whether they have a fucking business or not.
Well, I was joking with you before, Matt. You know, I'm a Pell Grant recipient. Left Reckoning has been a business for over 3 years, and I have a feeling that like the part of Austin, I live in is more working class where I grew up, might count as a disadvantaged community. So I do support Mamala now, so I can get those Pell Grants.
You've heard it.
However,
David's coconut pilled. David
so-
just got coconut pilled. I mean, that's that. You know what? I mean, we need to take advantage if that's the case
I
because we
need to
fucking
know, but
did
tell
not.
all those. Oh God. I'm
I was
sorry.
gonna say,
We got to get to the Branko thing, but I will just say this one last thing. We need to tell all those stories again. Remind people about how ridiculous we thought this Kamala campaign was back in 2020. Because I don't know if there's just because people are so stressed out because of how bad Biden is. I
Yeah.
really think people are forgetting what Kamala Harris was like when she was running for president of the United States against Bernie Sanders. And I guess people have the opportunity to see her again very, very soon. So, anyways, that's probably enough. Let's jump over to Branko. Branko Marcetic, you know him, you love him. Follow him and read his work at Jacobin. Right after that, we're going to go over the post game, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, where we got a hell of a lot more to talk about. It's hard to keep up with everything. So enjoy this conversation. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David here, joined as always by Matt Leck. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, David. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man, and really good to be sitting with our good friend, Branko Marcetic, who you know from Jacobin magazine, also the author of the, in my opinion, definitive Joe Biden takedown, Yesterday's Man. Branko, how you doing, brother?
Hey, great. Thank you for that plug. Now is the time to buy the book.
It is. Because I love it. No, and the book is really great. And I remember, I think I was talking with Crystal Ball, back like in 2019, 2020 or whatever. And she was saying something along the lines like, I remember feeling really bad for Branko because he wrote this great book. And then it looked like Joe Biden was, going to crash and burn. I was at the time when it was like Pete Buttigieg was looking like maybe who they were going to sort of all back in the Democratic Party. And then no, it was Joe Biden and, brought that political prospect back to life and also some more interest in your excellent books. But I have to ask you before we dive into everything. I mean, as somebody who's chronicled, Joe Biden's career for so long now, I mean, how does it feel to officially be able to say that, it's at least at its end, approaching its end?
Yeah, I mean, well, the entire thing has been a wild ride, as you kind of allude to there. And so I would not have expected any of this to happen. I would not have even expected, certain parts of the Biden presidency, which makes evaluating his legacy kind of a more complicated and more interesting task, although I think, still, there's a lot to criticize about what he has done, both of his career and in the last 4 years. I don't know. I mean, it's weird for me to suddenly think to pine for some version of Biden. Like if Biden could formulate a sentence and speak coherently, and also had decided to run on the stuff that the progressives got him to run on, as a kind of last act desperation, that would be kind of preferable to having Harris in there, who is unproven, and it's still not clear which way she's going to go. But the problem is that, the only reason he adopted any of that stuff is because of the fact that he basically proved himself in front of the entire world to be unfit to, I would say, continue being president, let alone campaign. So it's sort of this paradoxical situation. It's kind of like, yet again, we are all forced to kind of go along with a less than ideal situation and kind of keep our fingers crossed and hope it goes okay.
Well, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about like the legacy and all this, but I have a very specific question for you, which is about, since this debate, right, which was an absolute disaster, and like only the most unhinged people at this point are even, or can even come up with some argument that it wasn't an absolute disaster. But Biden was still holding on in a way that was pretty shocking and surprising, and especially towards the end, as more and more leaks were coming out, more and more of more and more of his everyday behavior was sort of being made public. how does that sort of square in with the rest of his career? I mean, that kind of like donkey mentality, right? That's kind of stubborn mentality. How does that fit in? Or do you think this is something that developed over maybe the past few years, right? This kind of hyper belief in himself.
Yeah. I mean, some people have, put forward the idea that maybe because of whatever is wrong with him, that has kind of made him more stubborn. I mean, clearly he is a stubborn man. And he is to give him something positive, he's someone who perseveres because he does have immense self-belief. I mean, look, maybe anyone else would have dropped out in 2020 after, 3 humiliating losses in the primaries, the first 3 primaries. But he kept going, and ultimately it kind of worked out for him because things beyond his control happened and put him in position to be the nominee. So, some of that is maybe more heightened in these years. But I'll say, look, this is a guy who his entire career, he wanted to be president. This is what he has been going for, not just his entire career, his entire life. He wanted to do this, which is why he came back and ran in 2019, even though, arguably he was past it even then. And I think from what I have read about some of his thinking in the last few years, he seems to have developed this idea that, not just the 2020 win against Trump, but then also the 2022 midterms, which, to be clear, were a loss for the Democrats, but have been kind of weirdly reframed as sort of a triumphant victory. He came to see those as really a result of his own kind of unique political genius, or at least, his own unique political appeal, instead of kind of both those things being part of wider social and political forces kind of sweeping him into power or sweeping him and his allies into power. So I think that probably also had some role to play.
Right. Yeah. Just to name it, like Roe versus Wade. Like, right. Yeah. If you want to minimize a massive midterm swing, it helps to have the Supreme Court do something massively unpopular.
Exactly. Yeah. Roe v. Wade, just a slate of historically weird and unlikable candidates, Republican candidates that were just very off-putting to ordinary people. A whole bunch of stuff. And of course, in 2020, you had the pandemic. You also had, even though Biden almost screwed himself by basically shutting down door knocking for his campaign, he was ultimately saved in key states because of progressives and because of people like Socialist Rashid Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and others mobilizing in key states to actually, and not just them, but, progressive movements there mobilizing to door knock for him there. So, yeah, very much always... in the last few years, he has been kind of the beneficiary of things beyond his control. But I think for him, he internalized, this is all my doing. And that ended up making it very hard to dislodge him from his position.
It seems to me there's a pretty advanced case of senator brain going on here with him. Like, talk about in the final week saying, like, I'm the guy who helped keep NATO together and keep China down. It's like, I'm curious because you alluded to things you sort of expected to on the positive side, and we'll have plenty of time to, like, bury Joe Biden because I think that's what we should get our shovels out in a second here. But just as for in terms of like the positive parts of his legacy, what would you emphasize?
It's funny that Biden seems to think that NATO and AUKUS, NATO expansion and AUKUS, are like his great legacies. It's like, first of all, no one cares about that. But secondly, it's very dubious those are even good things. And we can go into why later. But, the best thing about his presidency is the fact that he, at least for a very brief window, threw out the kind of Washington fiscal orthodoxy, that kind of Reagan era economics that basically he had held to for almost his entire career, and actually, attempted to do the right thing for the country, regardless of what the price tag of it was, regardless of whether he had bipartisan buy-in for it. So obviously, the American Rescue Plan, bigger stimulus than Obama, brought the economy back. It was a huge lifeline for a lot of ordinary working people. The child tax credit was in there. The problem is that we should give him credit, I guess, for wanting to go big with the Build Back Better bill. With basically just shoving every part of his agenda, massive expansion of the social welfare state, into one bill. That would have been great if it passed. Unfortunately, it did not pass. And that ultimately, I think, doomed his presidency. And I think that the fact that it didn't pass is directly related to choices that he made, which I can go into. But to stay away from negative stuff for a second, student loan forgiveness, even though there's so many things you can criticize about it, but nevertheless, he still took that step, so that's good. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, the sort of leftovers of the original climate proposal that Biden put forward, that a lot of contradictory parts to it. A lot of things are not that good about it. But ultimately, the core climate fighting elements of it were a really important step for the U.S. transition to renewables, and have been making a really big difference, and hopefully will continue to do so unless Trump gets in and unravels it. I think other positive aspects I would mention on foreign policy, withdrawing from Afghanistan. Unfortunately, that did give his administration himself a black eye from the media that he seemed to never recover from. Sadly, the media completely turned on him for that. But he was completely right to do it. And for a long time, I said, that was one of the most politically courageous things I've seen, which is surprising from a guy whose career is not defined by political courage. But now I start to think maybe that was just his stubbornness again, kind of just acting. And I think also winding down the drone wars. Besides that, less people have been killed, or fewer people have been killed by drones under Biden than under Trump and Obama. I mean, that's a big thing. There were definitely good things about his presidency. I think the problem is that he in many ways did not go far enough.
Well, go ahead, Matt.
I just wanted to zero in on that Build Back Better thing a little bit, because I've been thinking about that a lot in the wake of Jamal Bowman's defeat by George Latimer, where all the ads attacking Jamal Bowman were he didn't support Joe in the infrastructure bill, and what he actually did was support Joe too much by wanting Joe's full Build Back Better bill and voting against like the sort of half measure. And, it's one thing to hear Joe Biden say, Joe Manchin, he really screwed us there. I would prefer the squad and squad adjacent to extract maybe a ceasefire. But if you're going to play this inside game, it would have been nice for Joe Biden to maybe say, hey, Jamal Bowman supported me. Maybe vote him back in New York. But that never happened. Like, that seems kind of like the problem there is like Manchin's gone now. And also, so are the people who were actually fighting for your agenda.
Yeah, I mean, they did what was supposed to be the plan that Biden and the Democrats all came to, which is that you keep these two things linked together, the physical infrastructure and the quote-unquote human infrastructure, the social safety net expansion, together so that you get this broad coalition. You can't have one without the other. The people that want to give a bunch of money away to business and Wall Street are going to have to sign on to this huge safety net expansion. But yeah, I mean, in the end, he abandoned it. I mean, I don't know how much time I should spend on this, but I sometimes feel like I'm a little crazy because I don't know. I don't see anyone else mentioning this, but to me, the fact that all fell apart can be traced basically to one decision that Biden made in about, I think, April or May 2021. He had passed the American Rescue Plan. He was riding high. He had approval ratings across partisan lines, sky high. And he had spoken with a bunch of historians reportedly shortly after that, where he said, yes, we have to go harder and faster and bigger than anyone thought. There's no time to waste. We have to do this right now. And he was right, because not only did the Democrats have such a slim majority, speed is kind of the essence here. You got to keep that momentum going, otherwise, people, you start to see parts of your coalition kind of get a little more cautious, a little less enthusiastic, so on and so forth. And unfortunately, rather than doing what he said he was going to do, Biden then said, actually, hold on, we're going to split this bill into two, and then I'm going to try and get Republicans to sign on to one half of it so that I can show that Washington still works, that people can still work across the aisle. And then, months went by, and the whole thing, momentum went away, inflation got worse. Media started saying, well, the reason inflation is getting worse is because of all the spending. So suddenly you start to lose people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who before, suddenly Manchin were all in on passing a massive infrastructure bill because there was a political pressure to do it. And in the end, because they uncoupled it, the safety net fell apart. So it's very sad. I mean, it didn't have to be that way, but unfortunately, this is the thing. Biden is kind of his own worst enemy. He's so obsessed, even now, with bipartisanship that he kind of collapsed his own presidential agenda.
Maybe just look a little bit ahead to how you're going to be attacking the GOP in 2024 as fascists and the end of democracy, and don't try to do a bipartisan thing that shows you can work across the aisle with them, would be, my advice. But David, you were going to...
No, I mean, I think this is a really good thing to highlight because when you look at Joe Biden's legacy as president, I think that, there is just a fundamental reality of having a lack of interest in fighting. And you look at something that you mentioned that I think was honestly shining achievement of Biden's presidency, which was the child tax credit, right? Which was a massive success, huge. Did they defend it? Did they run on it? They just let that shit go. Right. And and then as you were noting, separating the American Rescue Plan from Build Back Better was really disastrous. When it comes to, Biden's lack of fight, do you think it's this kind of foolish belief in bipartisanship, a bad calculation, as you were saying, that it's too much, too quick, or a fundamental allergy, which might be my take, but tell me if I'm wrong, right, of doing this kind of populist politics. And I don't just mean economic policy or anything like that. I mean going out in front of the country with the little hard hat on and being let's put America back to work. This kind of popular stuff. It feels like they ran away from everything that they were doing that was super popular. And then him talking about how his greatest achievement was NATO shows that his political audience doesn't really seem to be, the people on Main Street or whatever this in Scranton, right? As he was running on when he was running against Trump, when it was Scranton versus Park Avenue.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of all of that in there. I honestly am not sure how much he, in the end, really cared about that Build Back Better proposal. Look, I mean, that was a thing that first of all was put together by Sanders and the Senate Democrats. Biden obviously was involved. He was the one who was saying, yes, let's go big, put whatever you can in there. But I don't think he was intimately involved in kind of putting in the details of that plan. He didn't really, and has not really mentioned anything in that bill after 2021. Which even when he started running for re-election, he was talking about finishing the job. He never actually mentioned, what was the job? What were you going to finish? This immensely popular thing that used to be the centerpiece of his entire presidency just never got talked about, except for a few stray mentions occasionally in one speech or another. So I'm not really sure how much he actually cared about passing it, aside from the fact that it was made clear to him that passing it would cement him in history as a great president. I think that's what he cared about. That's what it seems like to me. Let me give you an example as a contrast that shows what I'm talking about. Put what I just described, all of that stuff with the splitting of the infrastructure bill and all of that, next to how Biden approached the $100 billion military aid bill. So there was 60 billion to Ukraine, 30 billion to Israel, I think 10 billion to Taiwan. Similar thing. What he did was they had a strategy of, we're going to keep these separate packages together so that, you have one side of Congress that doesn't want to vote for the Ukraine stuff, but they want to vote for the Israel stuff. You have one side of Congress that doesn't want to vote for the Israel stuff, but wants to vote for the Ukraine stuff. So to make sure they vote for all of it, we're going to just put it all together so that you can't vote down one without voting down all of it. And that bill ran into similar opposition. It looked for a long time like it was going to die. Biden did not split that bill up and go, you know what, it's over. Let's just pass maybe the Israel part of things and forget about the Ukraine stuff. No, what he did was he waited and waited, and he tried several different strategies. He even put the immigration, that's where the closing of the border first came. He put that in as a sweetener to try and get Republicans sign on. Ultimately, he managed to put this through by sheer persistence, by sticking with the original piece of legislation and by keeping it all together, and it passed. And I mean, that's not a good bill. That's a very bad piece of legislation. But for him, that was a really important thing. And to me, the contrast in effort and strategy between those two things, I think, is a reflection of kind of what he viewed as his political priorities. And we start to see that in these interviews that he's giving now as he's trying to make the case for himself. And he's saying, the thing that makes me great is that I made NATO larger and I made AUKUS happen.
Yeah, no, it truly is something. Well, in interest of time, I do want to make sure that we pivot to Kamala. But before we get there, I mean, we have to talk about what I think is probably going to be his defining aspect of his presidency, which is him just overseeing one of the most brutal massacres of civilians in a genocide in Gaza. I mean, I'm sure, I mean, how would you categorize his leadership or his activity here? Is it something along the lines of he's too weak and is hands off and distracted to do anything about it? Like, I mean, what is his influence on what we're seeing in Gaza, apart from just being bad? What is he sort of doing or not doing here?
I mean, in terms of what his administration is doing, it's just continually sending the weapons that Israel needs to carry out this continuous extermination campaign, which is what it is. I mean, I think we've gone past the point now where we can question, is this a genocide, is it not? I mean, there have been enough statements from not just top Israeli officials, but also, military leaders and all other people, soldiers, ordinary soldiers, to show that, yeah, this is a genocide. I mean, why is he just sending weapons continually? Why is he not standing up to this tiny country that is entirely dependent on the United States, that cannot wage this kind of war without U.S. support, that numerous presidents before him have put their foot down and said no to? I think yes, there's a weakness of character there for sure. Biden is unable to stand up to Netanyahu, seemingly. We've seen that in some of the reporting when they will leak, once Biden has a frustrating call with Netanyahu, he's fuming and swearing at him behind the scenes. Well, that to me does not convey strength, which is, I think, what these leaks are meant to do. To me, it conveys weakness. If you are unable to stand up to the person face to face, but just kind of impotently fume at them behind closed doors. There's other questions that we don't really know, because we frankly don't really have a very good indication of what has been going on inside this administration and who's running it. I mean, over the last few weeks, we've had all these reports that actually it turns out that Biden has been heavily stage managed for certainly this past year, but potentially a lot longer than any of us really realized. That not every piece of information makes it to him. That when he gets his daily briefing, that his advisors leave out certain information because they're worried about provoking a bad reaction. There was a report, I think from February, a Politico report, talking about how Biden was somewhat taken aback by the level of Muslim and Arab American anger towards him over Gaza because his advisors had been, quote, keeping him in a bubble. As it related to that. So, I think the other thing about it is that the question is who is running who's totally running the presidency under Biden, and then what are the people around him feeding him? Was Biden? How aware is Biden of not just maybe what Israel is doing? I'm sure he's sufficiently aware that this is a brutal campaign, but also beyond that, is he aware of the political reality that it's causing? That it's really put his re-election in peril. I don't know. He didn't seem to be aware that he was going to lose the entire election in a landslide until this Sunday. So I think it's a fair question. And the last thing is just he's a guy who has been reflexively pro-Israel to an almost cartoonish level his entire career. There's actually a piece that will hopefully be coming out tomorrow that I was writing before all this craziness happened, that kind of goes into his history with Israel. And I mean, look, Biden's not a politician of conviction or principle. He's a guy who just wanted to get elected and get reelected and stay where he was and hopefully move up. And I think he has always thought in his mind that the way to do that, if you want to go that way, you cannot piss off the kind of pro-Israel advocacy space. So I think part of that is probably related to it. But I expect we'll probably find out more details about what exactly has been going on behind the scenes as it relates to this really horrific war.
I'll just say I genuinely think that calls for him to resign if the argument here is that he doesn't have the capacity to run a presidential campaign. It's extremely worrying to think that this is somebody who's sitting in the Oval Office over these next few months, which I think will be very consequential.
Yeah, and for my part, I resisted the emphasis of leading up to the debate of maybe he doesn't understand what he's doing in Palestine because he's lost it. But when he gave that speech right after Trump was indicted or convicted, and it was about how there was a ceasefire plan that he got Israel to, we're just waiting on Hamas. I remember thinking, this is one of the most repugnant arguments I've seen a president make, and I also am not sure he knows what he's entirely saying because of how poorly he's delivering it. I think, one, I'd give him all of the responsibility, if he was fully consciously there, but I also think the guy is out to lunch.
Well, I'll just say one more thing, which is that remember when the war first started, towards the end of October, there was another piece in Politico that was basically talking about how all these people in Biden's circle, they viewed it as this really great thing because they were like, okay, here it is. This is what's going to bring back his flagging presidential fortunes. It's a war. Americans rally around a leader during wartime. He's going to now be able to show his decades of foreign policy experience and show his competence and everything. And of course, that was, just at the time when he went to Israel and the famous bear hug of Netanyahu. So I think clearly, whether that continued to be the case over the next months, for a good amount of time, clearly the calculation was both in his own mind and the people around him that this war was going to be good for him. And then I suspect, actually, that as it went on, they were kind of stuck in this no man's land because they were, on the one hand, afraid of clamping down and telling Netanyahu no because they were worried about getting savaged from the pro-Israel side. But at the same time, they knew that continuing to go down this road was just completely destroying the U.S. reputationally and also causing all kinds of chaos within the country and making him less popular. So, and then they were just kind of frozen with this indecision. That's kind of what I suspect, but again, we'll see.
Yeah, and I mean, it truly is just so horrifying. Just looking at the way that they've handled what is going on. I mean, it really is difficult sometimes to imagine worse leadership in this moment. But, to maybe pivot a little bit, because I want to make sure that we're getting some talk about Kamala in here. I mean, everyone's doing the memes. People are coconut pilled, as Matt knows, other people know. I'm not particularly enthralled with that stuff. I was very happy to see Biden step down. I had been calling for it. But frankly, I've been seeing people talking about Kamala in a way that sort of makes me worry that despite her quote about understanding context and stuff, that a lot of people have sort of forgotten who she is. Branko, I have some specific questions to ask you, but maybe could you just sort of give a kind of a basic brief outline of who Kamala is? Because I really do think that like some people need a little bit of a refresher about what her politics are.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, her and Biden were a perfect pair in the sense that, you know, her politics is not that much different from hers. Her politics is centered around climbing the ladder, getting more power, trying not to offend anyone too much, while also trying to appeal to people in ways that are kind of, you know, dishonest. And also, you know, very much built her career on being a prosecutor, being tough on crime, which she later kind of, once the mood around that started to change around, you know, 2016 and earlier, and then obviously beyond that, she started to try and pivot and kind of, you know, make herself out to be a progressive prosecutor. But she wasn't. I mean, if we think of progressive prosecutors like Larry Krasner, for instance, that's not at all what her record was. She had a pretty standard tough on crime record, to the point of, you know, not just tons of marijuana convictions, but also, you know, putting parents potentially in prison and fining them because their kids are truant from school, stuff like that. She actually was in her Senate campaign, in her Attorney General campaign, she was to the right of her Republican opponent on the 3 strikes law in California, for instance. So, you know, she's someone who, it's very, very tepid centrist politics. She's a big fan of donors. You know, this is the Democratic Party, unfortunately. You know, I think people should, yeah, people should be clear about who she is, because if there's any hope of actually pushing her to do anything, you can't go in there kind of starry-eyed. You know, I know the memes are all fun, and
yeah, they're very funny.
Kind of like, yeah, you know, it's a dark. We're in a dark time. People,
but you know, one thing I think is. But you know, one thing I think is very notable, though, about like just the prosecutor thing, is that just to show this being someone who goes with the wind, right? Yeah, in 2019, 2020, when that was sort of unpopular and it was ACAB and all those people were really worked up about police and policing. And now it's like, don't get me wrong, there's still some people who still hold those feelings, but the zeitgeist, at least in like the typical Democrat Party, has sort of moved a little bit on that. Now she's, you know, the strategy is to sort of run like, I know how to put felons like Donald Trump behind bars, right? You know, she's like, now there's an embrace of like that. I'm going to be tough on these kind of guys. Now, again, that's rhetoric against an unpopular president, but it's very funny to see that shift just in a few years, right?
It's both sides, right? Like the ACAB defund people are saying, hey, we got the prosecutor to go after the felon, and the tough on crime people are like, hey, we got the felon that's screwed over by the system going up against the cops.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't think that's going to be a particularly good strategy. I can see, you know, I can see it in a PowerPoint being shown in some dim room by like campaign consultants, being like, "Oh yeah, this is what we're going to do. It's prosecutor versus criminal," and that's, you know, I guess kind of clever framing. But like, is that really what people are looking for this election? I mean, you know, overwhelmingly, the thing that people are most worried about in this country, as they are, to be honest, all over the world, is this unaffordability crisis that we're in, where people can't feel like they can't keep up with the price of groceries, with the price of gas, but also with just the structural costs of living in the United States, where, you know, a medical bill can make you bankrupt, where rent is, you know, going through the roof, and even buying a house and paying for a mortgage is getting increasingly expensive. And that's the kind of thing that people are looking for answers for. And I think just saying, oh, Donald Trump is really bad and I'm going to put him behind bars, well, that's a very snappy slogan, I guess. But does that really speak to what people are looking for out of their government? I don't think so.
I also just think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of like Trump's popularity too with his voters, which is like pointing out that he's bad. It's like they already understand that like the whole Trump base is like he's a bad guy, but he's our bad guy, right? He's a bad guy who knows how to be bad to like do things that I'm going to like. So pointing out that again, I find to be a loser.
Yeah, and I mean, also they already tried this. I mean, that's what boggles my mind is that the entire plan until now was that they were going to try and prosecute Trump for whatever, and then they would, he would get convicted, and people would go, "Oh, this guy's been convicted. I can't possibly vote for him now. I can't vote a criminal into the office." And it didn't work. I mean, it didn't have any effect on his polling. And in fact, he's been leading for at least a year, right? So I guess they think the problem is that was a solid approach. It's just that Biden couldn't deliver it because of his issues.
Which is true to a certain extent, but it doesn't mean it's a winner.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about like Israel and all that in a second and her relation there. But before, I wanted to ask you, just remember what we remember from, because it's hard for us to predict. I mean, this is Tuesday. We'll probably see who she picks for VP. I think that's gonna be very telling in a lot of ways. But I totally agree that like, yes, if she is to like try to win this one seriously, like embracing, some economic populism, hell, like maybe she could revive the Biden claim of like, let's finish the job and articulate what that job is. But I wanted to sort of, tease this out of you, friend. There's been some sort of talk, if you remember from the Democratic Party's primary, there was moments where she would sort of do like a Bernie-ish pivot, sort of talk about like a greenish New Deal or like Medicare-ish for all, whatever. I mean, do you think that there is any kind of genuine economic progressivism within Kamala? Or do you think that she's somebody who sees something that's popular at that moment and might sort of want to, ride on the coattails of it?
I would say it's the second one. I have not seen anything in her career that suggests that she has really firm convictions about things. I mean, I think probably, abortion rights, certainly, things like that, which obviously important, but I think in terms of when it comes to the economic direction of the country, I don't know if she really has any firm thoughts. So yeah, I mean,
let me just cut in there to recommend Branko's piece, a lengthy piece on was it Which Kamala We're Gonna Get, where you go into her truancy sort of stuff around campaign season, which is one of her, I think, things that turns off the voters. Yeah, there it is. Which Kamala Harris are we getting?
Yeah, I mean, a good example is Medicare for All, which she opportunistically, I would say, signed on to because this was the post-2016 moment. Bernie Sanders had risen to national prominence. It looked like he was the guy to beat in the 2020 primary. Everyone kind of had to respond to his to what he was doing, to his policy proposals. So she signed on to Medicare for All. And then, once the campaign started, because she's someone who doesn't have firm convictions, who's purely kind of eyeing her way up the ladder, she proved pretty incapable of defending and arguing for the policy and ultimately sticking by it. So I think the first blow came when she was asked to debate who would eliminate private insurance, and she put her hand up, and then she got some criticism for it. Probably she got a phone call or two privately. And then the next day they came up with this preposterous explanation. Went, she didn't hear the question properly. She thought the question was who would eliminate their private insurance. Ridiculous. And then later on she came out, from memory, she came out with her own version of the Medicare for All plan. But it was, pretty nonsensical. It was like, we will get to full Medicare for All after 10 years. So not even the 2 terms that she theoretically would be president. It would be 2 terms of her and then another 2 years of whatever comes after that, which could be like a Republican who completely unwinds all that. I mean, there's other examples, but that one I think was a really good, just really illustrates how she's not really someone comfortable making this kind of economic populist pitch, which is unfortunate because I think that's what you really have to do to win this election and combat the Republican message, which is that the only way out of all these problems is to basically just hunt down and throw millions of people out of this country.
You know, I mean, it's just, and you also have to remember when all that stuff is happening in the Democratic primary, it's sort of like if you're ever in rural America and you see ads for a casino buffet and it sounds, oh, damn, they got prime rib and 150 items. It's going to be really nice. And then you walk in, you see what is actually on offer, right? They promise a lot. And it's amazing to hear like what we're going to get when these people get elected. And then they actually get elected and we get what we actually get, right?
Does anybody think that we would be just 6 years away from Medicare for all if Kamala won in 2020? Does anybody sincerely think that?
No. Well, so on this, and I really appreciate your time, but I want to spend just a couple minutes on this at least, as we have to talk about Israel, because I think this is one where there's a lot of kind of excitement that maybe there might be some shift, because earlier today it was reported that she's not going to be presiding over the absolutely ludicrous in the first place appearance of Bibi Netanyahu to speak in front of Congress. And some folks sort of seeing this as an opening. And I'd like to, to get your reaction. And then I also have a couple of notes from some of the things that her former staffers have said and that she said about this issue. But I would love to hear your thoughts about whether or not you think that this signals some kind of opening.
Well, I think it's an opening. Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, does that mean that she's, secretly, completely against the war and has a completely different position than Biden? I don't know. I don't think so, frankly, but I think it is an opening. Biden has proven himself incredibly personally stubborn on this issue. And it's also one that he has dug in so hard on that is hard for him to kind of turn back from. And even if he did, the damage has been done so bad. It's almost, from purely political calculation for him, it probably isn't even worth it. She is relatively untainted by it because she has gone out of her way to kind of signal here and there through press leaks, through that speech she gave that the White House reportedly watered down, that she, to kind of hint to the public, I'm not fully on board with this. I'm actually a little more in favor of ending the war. That does provide an opening. Unfortunately, it would be more of an opening if it was a really contested, if it was a real contest for the nomination. It seems like it's just kind of going to be a coronation of Harris, which gives less leverage. But, I saw today that a bunch of unions wrote a letter to Harris saying, it's time for the war to end. That's an important signal. It's clearly people are doing the right thing, which is that they're using this moment to try and organize for the end of this. And, fingers crossed that it works.
I think that it is absolutely important that people keep that kind of pressure up, which is why I think you shouldn't just hand, praise over to somebody, especially because I read there's a really interesting piece by Nahal Tusi, who's a columnist at Politico, about her decision not to speak not to preside over this Bibi speeches, because, what does that mean? Well, it means that there will be a camera of Benjamin Netanyahu and Kamala Harris sitting behind him, which means very public moment where if he says something, does she smile? Does she clap? Right. This allows her to take a little bit more time to figure out what her moves are on this. Not, so like, yes, it can be seen as maybe a slight or an opening on it, on Israel, but it also could be like, oh, she needs some time to sort of develop up a strategy and how she wants to play it. Two, let's not forget that she's going to be meeting one-on-one with Benjamin Netanyahu, and it would be great, if we get some great reporting out of that and can find that she was really hard on him about what he's doing. I sort of doubt that that's going to be the case. This is somebody who just a few years ago, she said, quote, when asked about her relationship with Israel, when did that start? She said, it is something that has just always been a part of me. I don't know when it started. It's almost like saying, when did you first realize you loved your family or loved your country? It was always just there, which is a pretty wild thing to do for talking about a foreign nation, by the way. I
meet people all over the country. And the amount of conversations I've had where they will just bring up their love of Israel. I can't remember a single instance yet. Seemingly every politician that runs for some kind of office in the United States has some like deep-seated long-term, to like infancy relationship and devotion to this foreign country, even if they have no like connection to it at all. It's very odd. It's a very strange coincidence.
I think it's the infancy of them as serious political candidates. Like that's when they actually all of a sudden realize, actually, I love this country. It's one of my favorite countries, actually. And the conventional wisdom is that I'm hearing among like people is that she'll show more empathy. I think I heard Mehdi Hassan say this on Democracy Now! And to me, it's like, I don't know that Biden is showing the proper amount of empathy for what our policy is, which is genocide. And I don't think somebody who can perform empathy is really going to help the situation all that much anymore. I think it's almost an advantage that Joe Biden is sort of like in the ring world, like barely connected to reality, trying to do this. I think Kamala, the opening is that she's actually like responsive to the real world and has to navigate this thing in the way Joe Biden's just like, not even noticing it. And so, I think, and I'd also just say like, you talk about Joe Biden kind of having done too much. It is like, I can theoretically argue that a second Biden term would be better for the Palestinians than a second Trump term, but it is not a fun argument to have to make. And Biden did nothing to earn it. Whereas like Kamala, it's like, I do think if Trump wins, I think, I don't think he's going to restrain Bibi. The only hope for that is that he's so pissed that Bibi acknowledged Joe Biden winning in 2020 that he's going to turn on it. But speaking of money, like Trump's getting so much money from Miriam Adelson that like he's just going to be horrible. So I just think like Kamala is, even though I think she's going to avoid and be cowardly on the issue every chance he gets already, like David said, with this decision that helps her dodge this, I think she is just more susceptible to pressure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the issue is not being able to perform sorrow over what the US is doing. The people in Michigan and all over the country are not horrified by watching because they're going, oh, if only the president looked a little more sad when these images come forward. They're saying, why is this still going? I mean, it's been 10 months. It's been nearly a year of this. And so, I think if they honestly believe that they're going to just come in and Harris will, sound more somber as she says Israel has a right to defend itself, that is not going to change people's anger and outrage about this issue. One more thing I'll say about, empathy and Biden, since we just brought him up. I think I wrote this in the piece I recently did about him, but it's a striking thing if you know his biography, which is he's a guy who we've endlessly been told over the last 4 years that he's this exceptionally empathetic person, that he has this preternatural ability to grieve with people, to feel their pain and their sorrow and their heartache, and to kind of relate to them and to be with them and comfort them. And it's because of the tragedies that he himself has suffered in his life, and most notably, very early on when he won his Senate seat. His young wife and 30-month-old daughter were unexpectedly killed in a car crash. And, it nearly destroyed his entire life, let alone his career. A guy who suffered something as shocking and horrific as that, the death of your family, you would think that he would have some kind of particular emotional connection or sympathy for the people in Palestine. But instead, I mean, what he has done for the last year of his presidency, this is the very last act that he has done as a politician, as a public figure, is to inflict that exact same horrific suffering that happened to himself on an entire society, on thousands and thousands of people, not just killing kids and not just killing their parents and their grandparents, slaughtering entire families. And in some cases, entire bloodlines cut off. I mean, to me, that is it reflects so much, but among so many things, it reflects the utter lack of empathy that exists in this man, who is obviously able to perform empathy in certain situations, or at least maybe genuinely feels empathy for certain people, but clearly does not feel anything for this population of this imprisoned population of people that is just going through living hell for 10 months and counting.
Well, good riddance. It's
Truly.
I do regret in a lot of ways though that it was his kind of enfeeblement that is going to be ending this person's political career, not the voters.
I will just say though, I appreciate all the uncommitted folks who are declaring victory on this, particularly like states like Michigan, because that is definitely a factor in the math that eventually caused him to, duck out.
100%. Well, Branko, it's always great speaking with you. We'll have links below to those recent pieces, and as you said, you have a good one coming out tomorrow. Anything else that people should keep their eye out for?
I'm sure there's going to be.
If you write another book that revives somebody's political career, why don't you write it about somebody we like next time, though?
Yeah. Yeah, do a Corbin book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do.
All right, appreciate it, brother.
Always fun.
Big time.
Branko.
It's a good one. And people definitely read those pieces. Both of those links are below. Branko is one of those folks who, when you see that name crawl across your feed, you should be clicking and reading, and also picking up that book, Yesterday's Man, which really was a great takedown of the Biden political history.
No, he's a very impressive writer. I mean, because that job, the sort of like immediate response thing, it's I like the different publications have maybe more liberal than Branko, but a lot of people do a lot of good work. Branko, like the Kamala Harris piece, is like a chapter of a book.
Yeah. Oh, you mean to put that out on Sunday or Monday morning when it came out? 100%.
Yeah.
And here's another thing, while we're singing Branko's praises, I will just say this is like a lot of socialists, understandably, sort of don't pay attention as much to the ins and out of like congressional politics or things like that, right? Because it's sort of like, we don't have a horse in the race. Right. Branko does, which is really great. And he's able to actually be, somebody who's keeping up with all that kind of stuff, give you the information, and also not being one of these people who, like, Branko has very strong and a lot of conviction towards his politics. But he's also not somebody who is just out there sort of looking for whatever dumb retweets or the buzzy argument of the day is. So he's definitely a great corrective to a constant kind of Twitter news cycle that I think a lot of people fall prey to. But
shame he has to condemn our friend from Pennsylvania, though. I'm just joking. That's just a joke against the people who were trolling Branko for, political violence.
Oh my God. I couldn't believe Branko wrote one of the most normal. I mean, it was a great piece. Don't get me wrong. I shared it, but like very normal response. And some people, I mean, a lot of these guys have just completely
not very revolution of your area of you.
Yeah. Definitely the revolutionary position was supporting like the waifu loving like anime boy who's mad because they didn't make the high school shooting team or whatever.
Very American though, because famously the number one shooter in American history, with the guy in Vegas, he wasn't going for the country music show originally. He was aiming for something else, and then it's just like, well, shit, I missed that one. I guess there's what else? What's next on the calendar, which is pretty grim to think about.
Extremely. Well, folks, we're gonna pop over to the post game Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We'll be taking questions from all of our wonderful patrons. We have an update on the third party race. Some very funny and interesting things going on there. I'll be filling some of y'all in.
Sounds depressing, actually.
We have a message beamed in from the Blood King himself, Peter Thiel.
We got Peter Thiel at Cambridge, and there's a few clips going around I got some fuller context of those, which is even more interesting from a guy who's, well, his position on Israel. You can hear people protesting it outside the entire time, and it's because of what Palantir is doing business with Israel. So we'll go into that a little bit.
You get access to that at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Really wonderful having Branko on the program. Really appreciate all of those people who've been supporting us all these years. People might know over the weekend it was the anniversaries of Michael's passing. So wanted to acknowledge that and also acknowledge all the wonderful people in the community and you, brother Matt, for all of your friendship over the years. It means a lot to us. So
yeah, back at you.
All right, friends, patreon.com/leftreckoning. Come over.
Yep. See you in a little bit, folks.